Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Why is international trade important to promote peace and stability, as well as to improve the quality of life for literally billions of people around the world? What are Canada and the state of Kentucky doing to improve the international trade between the two entities and to help achieve these goals? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at the importance of international trade, and we're sort of looking at Canada and Kentucky as sort of a microcosm of activities that take place literally every day all around the world. My guest today is an expert on international trade and on Canada-Kentucky relationships. My guest today is Ambassador Douglas George. Ambassador George served in Kingston, Jamaica as Second Secretary and at Canada's mission to the GATT as First Secretary in Geneva. From 2000 to 2004, he was counselor at the Canadian Mission to the European Union. Ambassador George served as Ambassador of Canada to the state of Kuwait from September 2011 to April 2014. And recently, he was appointed as Consul General of Canada based in Detroit, representing Canada in the states of Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Mr. Consul General, welcome to Global Connections Television.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today.
I appreciate you being with me today. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned the importance of international trade in the opening. Those were just a couple of items. Why is, in your opinion, why is international trade really vital to not only people in Canada, Kentucky, but around the world?
Well, it's a way of tying the world together and making the best use of our available resources. It's both Canada and the United States are major trading countries where a significant portion of our jobs, our wealth, our GDP depend on trade with other nations. Canada's biggest trading partner is the United States, but we trade with countries around the world, from Europe to Japan to China to Australia to South Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah. What is important about it is it allows a country to focus on its major advantages. Canada is a big producer of oil, gas, diamonds, other things. We produce more than we could use. We sell it to other countries, and we buy from other countries, things that we need. And it's this international trade that greases international commerce, that keeps the international commerce working, brings benefits to countries around the world, is a way of bringing countries from poor countries, helping them develop, helping them become richer, and giving a better quality of life to their people, and for countries like Canada and the U.S., and keeping our quality of life and allowing our citizens to benefit.
Exactly. As you mentioned, I think you said Canada is the number one partner of the number one destination for U.S. exports, and vice versa. Coming into this country, I guess more come from Canada to us. Is that correct? Or
we have the world's largest trading relationship. We trade every year $632 million in goods and services. Last year, another 100 billion in services. So every day, approximately $2 billion in trade in goods and services across the border. We're the envy of other countries. We trade automobiles, aircraft. We're the United States' biggest energy supplier. We're your biggest customer for food, for autos, for everything you produce, in essence. Mm-hmm. And we have a trading relationship that is not quite like other countries. If you're buying from Japan, they will send you a finished product, or China. But Canada and the US have a single economy. We build things together. If you buy a car today, parts of the car will come from the United States, parts of the car will come from Canada, some might come from other countries such as Mexico. You may have pieces of the car cross the border up to 7 times before a final automobile is assembled. Now, if it's assembled in Ontario or assembled in Kentucky, a large part of that car comes from the other country. Is it an American car, is it a Canadian car, or is it a North American car? These, we have, if I can remember the statistics, 8 million jobs in the United States depend on trade with Canada. And another 500,000 come through Canadian companies that have invested here in the United States. So the jobs that are coming from international trade are usually well-paying jobs. They pay, on average, above the average job out there. You will be, on average, these jobs pay more. I've heard varying statistics, and I don't want to nail it down, but it could be anywhere from 15 to 25% more. So the international trade brings good-paying jobs, and that's important for both our economies.
It certainly is, and that raises the standard of living, the quality of life for the people on both sides of the border. Now, you're the Consul General for Canada.
Yes.
And you represent Canada in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. And we're doing our taping in Kentucky. Why are you in Kentucky, and with whom are you meeting while you're here?
Well, as you mentioned, I was ambassador in Kuwait until April. And so this is my first opportunity to come to Kentucky. And I've been attending the Kentucky Business Summit. I've met with a number of Kentucky companies that may be investing in Canada or may be interested in buying from Canada. I've just come from a meeting with Governor Beshear, an excellent meeting. We had a great opportunity to talk. He led a trade mission to Canada in 2013, which was very successful. He led 55 Kentucky businesses to Canada, and from that trip, a number of deals have arisen. And I'm here for another day. I'll be talking to Leadership Kentucky, which is a group of young Kentuckians who are expected to grow into leadership roles. I'll tell them all about their largest trading partner, which happens to be Canada. And tonight I have the privilege of visiting the UPS facility here, which apparently is an amazing facility to visit.
Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, the United Parcel Service facility is the largest break bulk point in the world of any. Yes. It's located in Louisville, Kentucky, at the Louisville Stanford International Airport. But it's a major operation without a doubt. We're talking about Kentucky and Canada, and really this discussion could be held about a lot of different places. You have Canadian representatives, consuls general in other states in the United States. You trade with other countries. We're focusing on this particular relationship, which is sort of a microcosm of a larger relationship. Could exist between Brazil and Argentina and Canada or whatever. So a lot of what we say here today is certainly applicable far beyond the borders of the United States and Canada, as far as people who are trading with one another and working to, as you say, grease the wheels to a certain degree, grease the skids to promote peace, stability, and improve the quality of life and the standard of living. Let's focus a bit on Kentucky. What are some of the major industries? I know you already started to allude to it. What are some of the major industries that Kentuckians are involved in sending to Canada and vice versa, and Canada coming to Kentucky? What are some of the major products that we're talking about, or even reverse economic investment?
Well, I think the biggest area is automobiles and associated technologies. Kentucky is the third largest producer of automobiles in the United States. Ontario produces more than Kentucky, and I think even Michigan. We're basically two anchors on what could be called Auto Alley, because it's Ontario, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky are all major automobile producers. And as I mentioned, if you're producing a car, you may be doing it from steel that came from Canada, that crossed the border, was stamped in Michigan. You may have transmissions out of Canada, engines out of Canada, or vice versa. If you're in Canada, you may be putting on doors that came out of Kentucky, engines that came out of somewhere else in the United States. It's just a completely interrelated and seamless economy. Another major area of trade is agriculture. We are your biggest agricultural customer. We're your biggest transportation customer. We're your biggest automobile customer. In fact, Canada is Kentucky's largest customer, and we have, if you look at all the exports to Canada and add up the exports to the next 5 countries, Canada is still larger. Kentucky exports more to Canada than they do to the 28 countries of the European Union. Export more to us than to China. It's a very large and comprehensive trading relationship.
Mm-hmm. Please.
And what we do in the consulate, Canada governments do not trade. Governments help businesses trade. In the consulate, we can assist on making recommendations, getting groups together, helping Canadian businesses get into the United States, into Kentucky. If Kentucky-based companies want to invest in Canada, we have someone who will help, provide information, open doors. But our job is basically to assist companies that are trying to get out of and trying to trade with others. I'm the Consul General of the one in Detroit. I deal with 4 states. We have a total of 12 consulates in the United States. And we have, of course, the embassy in Washington, where the ambassador and his team deal with the federal government, deal with departments, deal a lot with politicians. We try and work very much as a team and working on issues and assisting each other, because there may be some specific issues dealing with only one state, but most issues deal with a large number of states. I am based in Detroit, so I'm the lead on construction of a new bridge between Detroit and Windsor. Now, you might be sitting here wondering, what does this have to do with Kentucky? 40% of Canada-US trade crosses the border between Michigan and Ontario. So that means that the cars that Kentucky is shipping to us go up to Detroit, cross the existing bridge. The agricultural products from California cross this bridge. The oranges from Florida cross this bridge. And we currently have a bridge that's 85 years old, and it's Canada's proposal to build a new one to streamline trade, to increase the ability of companies to trade between Canada and the U.S., and ultimately our goal is to increase prosperity for Canadians. And
exactly. And now that bridge, that would be a joint partnership between the United States government and the Canadian government. And she mentioned Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and Detroit, Michigan is where the bridge would be built. But it would certainly expedite the flow of products, whereas an 85-year-old bridge has to have its maintenance problems, to put it mildly. If it's not unsafe, it certainly is not the most expedient way to get back and forth. But it sounds like a very interesting project, and one that's very important.
It is. One of the issues around the 85-year-old bridge is when it was built from Detroit to Windsor. Now, on the Detroit side, it hooks up with a 4-lane highway. On the Windsor side, you have to go through 18 traffic lights through the middle of the city of Windsor until you can connect to a highway. This, if you're trading goods between Kentucky and Montreal, this slows you down. And what we're trying to do is expedite and expedite trade and make the border easier for people to use. So Canada will be the primary financer of the bridge and land purchases on both sides of the border, and we're just waiting on an indication from the U.S. administration that they will be funding the U.S. Customs Plaza.
Now, if our viewers would like more information on what we're talking about today, they can go to your website, www.detroit.gc.ca.
Yes.
And they can also check the Kentucky website, which is www.thinkkentucky.com. And they can tap into what international trade activities, economic development activities are taking place in Kentucky and what you're doing with these 4 states, and also link to your national website if they'd like to pursue that. There's a term that I've heard lately. It's called new international trade. What exactly does that mean to you, and how does that compare to the old international trade?
Well, when you look at Canada-U.S., as explained, we are much more into building things together. If you look at international trading patterns, they're changing, and it's becoming a much more competitive world out there. At the Kentucky Business Summit yesterday, we listened to a very interesting presentation on what states, provinces, municipalities, countries need to worry about in order to compete internationally, because it's not the old days, and things change quickly. Your competitors change quickly. Your competitors are always striving to get ahead, and you have to strive to get ahead. One of the big benefits of international trade is you have this exchange of ideas and continuous improvement. But what it'll mean for Canada, the United States, is we need to make sure we have the ability to compete internationally. That means educating people on new skills. Someone said the number one new skill for the future will be intellectual agility, the ability to change quickly. When a company is looking for some place to invest, the number one issue is not tax incentives. That may come in down the road. The number one issue is, can they get the people to do the job? The people who have the right technical skills, the people who have the ability to adapt. So for me at least, when I talk about new international trade, it is what we need for the future.
Exactly. Now, as you interact with businesses and with governments, the
Yes.
private sector, the public sector, and everybody in between, I guess, do you see that there are best practices that are coming to the surface? I know every field changes every day. You have innovative ideas, creative ideas that are brought into the discussion, into the process. But are there certain best practices that are taking place today? You mentioned agility. That's very, very important. Maybe 20 years ago, we didn't think along those lines. We had a very standardized way of producing products, and we just went from A to Z and didn't change much in between. But are there other best practices today that not only be applicable for Canadian businesses, Kentucky businesses, but businesses around the world, really?
Well, there's a lot that is being done. There's some things we do that are tried and true. As I said, Governor Bashir led a trade delegation to Canada. This was an opportunity to introduce Canadians to Kentucky businesses and get them talking. That's one of the biggest issues, is how do you get the information to the right people? We use trade fairs, we use websites, we use social media as ways of getting the information out. But other things that need to be done locally, that is preparing your companies to trade. There's groups in Kentucky that spend a lot of time on education and marketing, consulting, and you have someone with a great idea. How do you get to the point where that person will export? What do they need to do? What skills do they need? Who do they talk to? It's never an easy issue to sort out. We always learn from each other. In Canada, what we were doing 30 years ago when I joined and what we're doing now is completely different. But we're still ultimately looking at the same goal, is how do you work with your companies in order that they can benefit from what's happening in the world, export goods and services. All I can say is you never stop learning, you never stop changing.
Exactly. You have to be adaptable. You just
Yes.
cannot get wedded to doing it one certain way. And it's really remarkable. You look at it, the United States has 50 states. We have about 302 million people. Canada has, as I recall, 10 provinces, 3 territories. You're the second largest country in the world land-wise. You
Yes.
have a population of about 34 million, something like that.
Yeah.
You have a very high standard of living, about $47,000 per capita, more or less. But it's really remarkable, the trading relationship between the two countries. So a lot has been accomplished. I'm sure much more will be accomplished in the future. We're just about out of time. Before we run out, I want to ask you about one issue that's really getting a lot of play in the United States and probably in Canada too, and that's the Keystone XL pipeline.
Yes.
This is a pipeline that's going to run basically from Alberta down through the prairie states to Port Arthur, Texas, about 1,800 miles of pipeline. And it deals with shale, tar shale, I guess, tar sands in Alberta. What is the status of that? Let me just ask you, what are the pros and the cons? We've heard a lot of debate on it both ways. What are the pros and what are the cons of a pipeline crossing the U.S.?
Well, Canada is the United States' largest supplier of energy of all kinds. Last year on oil imports, we supplied about 31%, I believe. And while there's more oil being developed in the United States, you're still going to need oil well into the future. Keystone XL is one of the most recent pipelines that's proposed. It would take oil from northern Alberta, the oil sands area, and as you said, ship it down to Texas. It's something that has been studied extensively. I was going to say studied to death, but I'll say studied extensively.
That's the euphemism,
Yeah.
extensively, right?
Yes, and there's been 5 different studies that say the environmental assessment is clean, it's not going to add to greenhouse gases. We see huge benefit to Canada, obviously, but also to the United States. It's going to create thousands of jobs and bring economic benefits to both sides. But more importantly, Canada is your safest, most reliable, friendliest, and closest oil supplier. If you look at where some of the other oil supplies are coming from, countries may not be as friendly to the United States. They may be in areas of the world, even if they're friendly to the U.S., they may be in areas of the world which are in turmoil. I think it's in the United States' interest as well as Canada's interest that this pipeline be built, and we're hoping that approvals will come through soon.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the concerns that's been raised is that there's this Ogallala aquifer, which provides water to a large number of people out in Nebraska, Kansas, and that area. And of course, pipelines so often do spill. They have leaks, and some folks were concerned that it might leak and get into that aquifer. Are these pipelines better built today than they were 15 years ago? Or are they more resistant to having leaks and spills?
The quality of the pipeline, the safety around it is much improved, and the routing of the pipeline is being very carefully studied to make sure that there's no concerns there. At the moment, oil is traveling from Canada to the United States primarily by train. We believe that pipelines are a safer way to transport the oil.
Mm-hmm. Over trucks and rail for sure, no doubt about it, yes. But, and cheaper too, to be quite honest, yes, right. Well, in the closing moments we have, as you look, you've had a varied career with the Canadian government in Geneva. You've been involved with UN agencies. I think you mentioned the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, and a few others. But what do you see as one or two of the major challenges to helping to promote international trade, or how can folks work on really increasing their international trade and overcoming some of these challenges that we're referencing?
Well, we've been working for a long time on the Doha round in the WTO and making some progress. We've had some early harvest, but the large number of countries involved and the large number of issues, it's very complex. What Canada has been doing is a number of bilateral or plurilateral trade deals. We've got an agreement in principle with Europe, and we're involved with the United States on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think we just need to keep working on creating this situation so companies can trade.
Exactly. Consul General Doug George, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on Global Connections Television.